District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. This show is fast approaching 500 episodes. I think we're going to hit this milestone next week. Crazy to think that I've recorded nearly 500 episodes of this show since I launched it 7-8 years ago. Grateful to have you here on this wild and crazy podcast. Hopefully you find it substantive somehow. We break down complex topics very simply here on District of Conservation, and this episode is no exception. We're going to talk about the latest in reconciliation markups and a new trend called Fisherman Core that is sweeping social media and fashionistas everywhere. Let's back up a bit about the budget reconciliation process. I've talked about the budget reconciliation process. It happens usually on an annual basis because Congress has to produce a budget with respect to discretionary spending pertaining to laws that Congress passes to fund agencies. Of concern in this iteration of the budget reconciliation are several things. The Inflation Reduction Act green subsidies, which I'll go into more now that we've had the Ways and Means Committee markups and the Energy and Commerce Committee markup, both of which have finished in the last few days. Most recently was Energy and Commerce yesterday, Wednesday, the 15th, which I will dedicate a lot of the episode to. And I was asked by a lovely commenter and listener to the program on Apple Podcasts, delivering us our 100th rating, from Candace Parton. I'll touch a little bit on the public lands component. I listened to this podcast open. I appreciate the points you're making. I sure hope you're right that public lands will not be sold, but they continue to add, land sales in the 11th hour. Could you explain more about the purpose of pretending they might sell off land? It's extremely unpopular here in Idaho and everywhere, as you've said, but it doesn't seem like a fake out when this is literally the only way they could ever do it, sneakily last minute through reconciliation and with a Congress tilted just right. Pun intended. Thanks for your thoughtful podcast. And granted, as you all know, I am very conservative politically. I sometimes have disagreements with my fellow travelers on the public lands issues because I am from the West and I see a value to public lands. I think they are often mismanaged, and I do not like the Democrat posturing of public lands to basically make everything a national park. I've made that explicitly clear here on the show since its inception. And I sometimes think this minority position by Republicans can also be very alienating and make no sense to the debt and deficit. So let me answer this first before I go into the IRA subsidy component of reconciliation talks and this gutting of green subsidies, which I want to see, which I think would be more impactful and helpful to reducing the debt and deficit. They want to, Congress and the Republican trifecta, see over $1 trillion in cuts to reduce the debt and deficit, would be to rein in unaccountable government spending, which is largely stemming from a lot of laws passed under the Biden administration or during the Biden administration time. So many spending bills, trillions of dollars added to the debt and deficit because of green spending, so-called infrastructure spending, the American Rescue Plan, and other items, at least 3 to 4, I think close to 4 bills that largely, upon passage, invited inflation, rose the debt and deficit, really didn't do anything to get a handle on these financial woes that we have in this country, which goes back to Candace's question about why is this being considered during reconciliation. She did mention that this is the only way, if you include a lot of different items that have some tie into discretionary spending, things authorized by Congress and Antiquities Act and land transferences do fit into this. But it takes a lot more effort to execute and follow through with land transference. And it's a very unpopular position, as I've made here on the show. And besides that, I think an estimate in terms of what the valuation of public lands would be, whether it's these unaccountable lands that we hear some Republicans talk about, or if it's the whole enchilada, the over or close to 300 million public land acres across different agencies that some people want to wholesale transfer, which I think would not do well with a lot of people. It'll even upset conservatives like me to see this. I don't want to see any extreme. I just want to see better management, open up more access, allow for energy development that is smart, and keep things as is. But to Candace's question, I don't want to veer off too much as to what the thinking is in terms of inclusion here. So there is about 500,000 acres if this House version from Natural Resources is to be finalized. What I'm hearing from the Senate side, what I'm seeing from the Senate side is that there will likely be more opposition to any transference of land sales. And I believe it passed with a narrow vote in the House too. And I think you'll see some pushback even from some stalwart Trump supporters in both the House and the Senate to any relinquishing of land in this manner. This is the only time you could see such a maneuver, whether it's a trial balloon or something that actually does happen. I think it's the former. I think it's a trial balloon. You will not see a standalone bill to pass the wholesale transfer of public lands, which is why, as Candace was asking me in her comment, in her review, really appreciate her lending it, why it's being done now. And some see this as an opportunity to do this. Again, I don't agree with the position. But in terms of the valuation of public lands, we are being told, or some of the estimates going around are that some of these unaccountable, so-called useless, no-use lands or worthless lands, as some are putting it, the value of them would be about $1 trillion to $2 trillion. If you follow economics and you know what the current debt and deficit is, it's $36 trillion and growing. So let's say you hypothetically sell off public lands to get back $1 to $2 trillion. Again, very unlikely this happens, very unpopular. It's a dent in the debt and deficit when you're thinking of entitlement spending, which is what is eating up most of the debt and deficit. And I don't have to go into an economics debate or discussion here, but that's the reality of things. What is better to do in terms of prioritization, which I think Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce tackled more, and this isn't to knock the entire natural resources efforts. I think they put in a lot of good reforms. I disagree strongly with this public land provision that they've included. And it's okay to have some disagreements. And I was kind of shocked to see the chairman sign off on this. Like, he has largely been against the sale of public lands, but he wanted to throw in some provisions for Congressman Adamai of Nevada, and I believe one Utah member. I think it's Nevada and Utah, where these 500,000 acres would potentially transfer from the feds to the state. I think the reasoning is under the guise of this memorandum of understanding with HUD and Department of Interior for affordable housing, which is, let's be frankly honest, a terrible idea. I talked about this with Dana Lash, and you even see people who are skeptical of public lands even saying, like, this makes no sense to do this, considering the infrastructure liabilities, infrastructure shortcomings of these really rural areas. There's no way you could support affordable housing or mass construction in many of these places. And intentionally, these places are designed for people to get away from the cities where all of these problems are happening. So why would you bring and import those problems to rural areas out west? Makes no sense. So some say and argue it's because of that, to help with the housing issue, but it's just a cover, I think, sadly, for transference They may use that as a justification, but it goes to, sadly, people wanting to sell it off. And I see other conservatives who are in the conservation, outdoor hunting, fishing space actually calling out some of the lawmakers pushing this, who they would normally agree with on most issues, like I would, and calling them out about the wholesale transfer of public lands. Again, a very unpopular idea. You're not going to recoup those monies for lowering the debt and deficit. And then we're going to become like Europe, which we don't want to become, especially for making it more feudal and inaccessible to people, that your income will basically determine if you're wealthy. Nothing wrong with being wealthy, of course. I'm a capitalist and free enterprise supporter. But the thinking is Europe is very feudal still in terms of access to hunting and fishing grounds, where it's a pay-to-play system. Public lands are very much a luxury that we have here in the United States. Again, can be better managed, but it's not something you see elsewhere across the world, which makes our conservation practices stand out in unique ways and the envy of the world. And again, we have a lot of private opportunities too. This is not to knock private opportunities. I'm a believer of both private and public land opportunities. I've learned how to hunt on private land. I go fishing on public waters. I do a combination of both. I like and enjoy both, and there's nothing worse or better about either option. But I think public lands have a value. They should be open to multiple uses, including energy development, hunting, fishing, and the like. Smartly done, of course. But I don't want them being carved out, opened up for affordable housing and other really silly proposals, which make no sense. And then you open it up to development. And yes, Yellowstone is a fictitious show. It does kind of highlight some realities of situations out west, human-wildlife conflicts, encroachment on property rights, and the like. And it foretells what can happen when opportunistic people want to carve out beautiful spaces, wild spaces, and those areas never return to what they were. It's a cautionary tale, even though it's fictitious, of what could happen to the West, which is why you will never see me endorse a wholesale transfer of public lands. I support Antiquities Act reforms. I would love to have seen that included in reconciliation for future determinations as to what can qualify as a national monument, or the rescission of national monuments, which is allowed. Presidents can actually shrink monuments. It's within their Section 2 powers of the Antiquities Act. Fun fact, if you didn't know, and we talk about this all the time. Why couldn't we have seen reforms to the Antiquities Act included in the natural resources markup? That would be much more preferable. You'd have had far more support across the different chambers and the like, and everyone would be happy. But again, final language, as I'm going to talk about for the IRA, green subsidies, where I am a little more encouraged, but I'm still a little, miffed by what I've seen so far. I wish they could have gone a lot more. Maybe they will get some more cuts and termination of certain subsidies. But this is all still up for debate. Like, reconciliation goes back and forth between the chambers. We're not going to see a bill put on the president's desk until earliest I've seen is Independence Day, if we're lucky. Could be even pushed back to August. President Biden, when he signed in the Inflation Reduction Act as part of reconciliation, it was signed into law in August of 2022, August 16th, 2022. So this could be prolonged. There's things still up for debate. I'm not a fan of the trial balloons, like public land sales being included, but I am encouraged, and I think a preferable alternative would be the rescission and termination of IRA green subsidies, which, if left in place in totality, and I'm going to talk about what the phaseouts mean according to the markup from Ways and Means in Energy and Commerce. The Cato Institute forecasts that by 2050, that green subsidies are going to cost upwards of $4.7 trillion. A more immediate time frame across the next decade, it's going to go close to $2 trillion for reducing emissions annually by 0.7%. We would have seen an annual emissions reduction of 0.4%, according to conservative estimates. And even according to the Congressional Research Service, which does a lot of reports on bills, and it's published on congress.gov. You can find it in the show notes. We were going to be on track to reduce emissions by 20-odd% on the low end, I think 30%, some odd percent on the high end, without passing the Inflation Reduction Act. It said that with it, you add maybe 6% increase more, likelihood that you'll see, a little bit more, 6% increase on the low end of emissions reductions. So why spend trillions of dollars to produce this when we were on track to do this, and we could even do this even more, reduce emissions in terms of the goal, supposed goal of the IRA, with innovation instead of the government picking winners and losers. Which brings me to the Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce markup results and what exactly will be done with the IRA green subsidies. I'm looking for analysis because I could bore you with all the details. Admittedly, I did not watch the 20 plus hours of markups. It's insane if you do. Kudos to those who can. Even me as a political junkie, I just can't do that. I don't have the aptitude to do that. So people who are more savvy than me, some people I travel with in the policy circles, have compiled and broken down exactly what the markup produced. What are we going to see? And I will share different reactions, what it is, and then what others wished that they could have seen in markups. And again, this is contingent on more debates. We may see the president jump in and say, hey, these cuts are not sufficient. I want to see a full repeal of the so-called Green New Scam. In his words, not mine. But I do think it's a ridiculous proposal. Anything to go net zero is impractical, never will be fulfilled. You're elevating unreliable solar, wind over geothermal, nuclear, oil, gas, coal, which are far more reliable and can work when they are unshackled by subsidies, red tape, and the like. But I want to read for you kind of the summary that I was able to extrapolate from American Action Forum. And this is someone I met recently. We've been in a couple meetings. I ran into this gal at Google when we were there for their energy policy lunch. And this is Shooting Pomerleau. And she is the director of energy and environmental policy at the American Action Forum. Lovely gal. And she has a great breakdown of the overhaul of IRA energy credits, the House proposal. In her bullet points, here's the takeaway from what was achieved during markup this week. The House Ways and Means Committee draft of reconciliation proposed a significant paring back of about 60% of the Inflation Reduction Act energy tax credits, which would raise about $515 billion in revenue from 2025 to 2034. This proposal would repeal some energy credits immediately, including all clean vehicle credits, EV credits, alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit, all residential energy efficiency credits, and the clean hydrogen production credit, which would raise approximately $306 billion from 2025 to 2034. It would also add phase-outs and restrictions to several credits, including the clean energy production and investment credits, the clean fuel production credit, carbon sequestration credit, nuclear power production credit, advancing manufacturing production credit, and the credit for certain energy property, which would raise about $210 billion from 2025 to 2034. So what you could take away from that is 60% of the IRA green credits would disappear. I would have liked to have seen full repeal. I know with the congressional makeup in slim majorities, that's almost impossible. I'm not too privy on the term phase-outs. I would have liked to have seen rescissions or termination of that. And what a lot of us internally in the public policy space in energy, we're talking about, we would have liked to have seen a full termination of the production and investment tax credits, because that is what is really eating at these costs and why estimates of IRA green subsidy costs continue to go up. They're boundless because these two expanded, renamed clean electricity production and investment credits have no caps. They're uncapped, meaning they can be bid on by people. People can request it. Individuals and businesses can apply for this and get this. And because of demand, the federal government's going to fund this in perpetuity, therefore making it uncapped. Is the simple way of going about it. You don't have to be super wonky to understand what an uncapped tax credit is. And when you look at the deadlines, proposed deadlines of this from the original IRA, it said it could phase out by 2032, or if these credits help achieve, if they work. And green energy subsidies typically don't work as intended. They promise great things, they produce the opposite. It's a contingent expiration date, as I'm reading and I've learned because I'm in the process of writing a report on the IRA to break it down simply for you all because it is confusing as intended. That's the intent, to make it purposely confusing so you don't understand what is going on. So a contingent expiration date, meaning 2032 for these production and investment tax credits for solar and wind in particular, or when they help achieve a certain emissions reduction goal, which is hard to measure and quantify and can be extended or phased out or terminated in several decades. I will link to the original Cato study that broke this all down, but I've gone into specificity on this in a forthcoming report for work you'll see next month. Fun teaser there. But in every analysis you see about IRA green subsidies, these two particularly come into question because they're uncapped and there's no deadline for ending them, as previous wind and solar tax credits were designed to do. And granted, I don't believe in green subsidies. I think everything should be done on an equal playing field. People will say, well, don't you support ridding it for oil and gas? Sure, I'll support it for removing it from any energy technology. I think it creates an unfair advantage to unprofitable businesses who can't credibly compete in the market. And wind and solar are no longer nascent. Wind and solar are mature industries. We've seen a wind production credit since 1992, and it even goes a little bit further back than that. A solar credit was created for the first time in 2005. So in the decades that both of these production and investment tax credits have been in existence, we haven't seen clean energy adoption that was promised. Wind only accounts for 10.2% of U.S. electricity generation today, and wind speeds are a lot lower according to the Energy Information Administration. So there's not so much wind blowing. And solar only accounts for the grid 3.9%. Very minuscule in the grand scheme of things. Coal, oil, or nuclear, natural gas, and coal still account for 78% of electricity generation in the United States. So billions in subsidies have gone to so-called clean energy adoption for solar, wind, and I'll even talk about electric vehicles because in this forthcoming report I talk about that too. You see the grid not adding more of that because they're both intermittent sources. And with respect to electric vehicles, do you know that of the 200-something million, almost 300 million vehicles on the road, only 1.4% are electric? These mature industries, not nascent industries, are not being favored by the markets. And if you want to buy a solar panel, go for it. Just don't make me, the taxpayer, pay for it. You want to have a wind turbine on your property? Knock yourself out. But again, do it on your own accord. It's really hard to see these so-called clean energy technologies thrive in the markets on their own. They've needed subsidies to barely stay online. That's the sad reality. If they can credibly compete in the private market, I would love to see that. But they've largely been propped up because of federal support, which is why I'm really skeptical of them. Let me expand a little bit. Sorry, I got lost in that with energy and commerce. I read the ways and means component. Now is to read the verticals pertaining to environment and energy. Thankfully, these documents are really short, so we're going to scan through them. And then I'm going to read a critique from Alex Epstein, who, like me, supports full repeal. And I will take what I can get, but I would have loved to have seen full repeal of these as well, because I don't think the phase-out language is adequate enough to really sink Biden's IRA. We need to see full repeal if we want to get rid of this, because it'll become like Obamacare if we don't. So hopefully they go back to the drawing table and get some more cuts, ideally closer to 100% repeal, maybe in the 90% category if we can achieve that. But they got to hit the production and incentive tax credits. That's the meat of it, the crux of it. All right, the energy component, energy subtitle, sorry. Rescissions relating to certain IRA Act programs, state-based home energy efficiency contractor training grants, funding for DOE, loan programs office, advanced technology vehicle manufacturing, energy infrastructure investment financing, tribal loan guarantee program, transmission facility financing, grants facilitating the siting interstate electricity transmission lines, interregional and offshore wind electricity transmission planning, modeling, and analysis, advanced industrial facilities deployment program, certificates, FERC certificate fees for certain energy infrastructure at international boundaries of the United States. Okay, so allowing for more natural gas export and imports. I like that. Funding for Department of Energy loan guarantee expenses, expedited permitting, Definitions, covered application, federal authorization, expedited review. This is the meat of it. Submitting to a commission in written notification, making a payment to the Secretary of Treasury to amount that's lesser than 1% of expected cost of applicable construction, or $10 million, submission of review no later than 60 days after the date which the applicant elects to obtain an expedited review. All right, so a little bit easier, from my understanding, to get approval for certain energy infrastructure projects, and you could read that for yourself. Subtitle B, pertaining to the environment, repeals and rescissions. Repeal and rescind, relating to clean, heavy-duty vehicles. Repeal and rescission relating to grants to reduce air pollution at ports. Repeal and rescission relating to greenhouse gas reduction fund. That is a very wasteful program. So Ways and Means more so deals with the subsidies, by the way, for those of you listening in. And the Energy and Commerce seems to be tackling IRA monies from the subsidies that are funding that wasteful EPA, DOE programs you've heard about, like the $20 billion slush fund at EPA. So Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is one of them. Repeal and rescission relating to diesel emission reductions. Repeal and rescission relating to funding to address air pollution. This doesn't mean air pollution will not be tackled, by the way. These are just some really extraneous programs. Repeal and rescission relating to funding to address air pollution at schools. Low emissions electricity program. Funding for Section 200 of Clean Air Act. Repeal and rescission relating to funding for implementation of American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. Repeal and rescission relating to funding for Enforcement Technology and Public Information Act. Greenhouse gas corporate reporting. Environmental product declaration assistance. Emissions and methane emissions and waste reduction incentive program for petroleum and natural gas systems, and much more. So you can read House Energy and Commerce and also Ways and Means for yourself. And I want to read briefly Alex Epstein, who is an energy philosopher. We've interviewed him on the program several years ago, but he felt like these were inadequate, which is why he and a couple others are behind efforts to get the Energy Freedom Act passed as a standalone bill, which would repeal nearly all of the at least 20 of the 22 IRA green subsidies, and that is a bill introduced by Senator Mike Lee and a few others. That's where I have a lot of agreement with Senator Lee. I think one of the few areas I disagree with Senator Lee is the public lands question. And I've had him on the show, and I asked him before if he would sell public lands. He gave a very interesting answer, and I have a good relationship with his office, but we disagree a little bit on the public lands component. That's okay. But he supported this bill, and Alex Epstein has great questions about why they couldn't, in negotiations so far with House Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce, why they couldn't extract even more in concessions and removal of IRA credits. Here's what he wrote on his Substack. So he is miffed, rightfully so, by the inclusion of phaseouts in the Ways and Means budget proposal for reconciliation in the text. And again, a lot of us wanted to see the term termination over phaseouts because, okay, they get phased out, and then let's say hypothetically a Democrat administration that is beholden to Green New Deal aims or net zero aims comes back again, says, okay, sorry, we're not going to phase this out. We're going to extend this for another 10 years, or we're going to have a contingent expiration date on emissions reduction goals. So that is why I think he is taking issue with the phase out language, which I largely do too. He points out 3 reasons why the phase out language is concerning, why this wouldn't do an adequate job. It only repeals 60% of green subsidies. So he thinks that's insufficient. So he says that there are 3 fatal flaws. Savings are based on phase-outs, not ending subsidies now, he argues. And I want you to read his post for yourself. Deal breaker 2, phase-outs don't even start until after Trump's term ends. 3, 2 huge subsidies are kept. Clean fuels and carbon capture, both of which he argues are huge giveaways to expensive CO2 reduction activities that can't meaningfully scale. Read his Substack if you want to get the full explanation behind his disappointment with phase-outs over termination. why he thinks the 60% reduction instead of full repeal is inadequate. And I tend to agree with that argument. I would have loved to have seen closer to 100%. You can't win it all, but it still leaves a lot of the really, really problematic production and incentive subsidies in place, which are uncapped and would increase the cost of green subsidies to trillions upon trillions of dollars in perpetuity. And we will never see an end to this. Boondoggle. But I want to end the show on a lighter note with you about my thoughts on this Fisherman Core trend that is sweeping social media. Fashion houses everywhere across the country. I caught whiff of Fisherman Core from some friends on social media, and I actually really like the aesthetic. It's very chill, vibrant colors, a lot of blues, a lot of tans, and I'm going to go into detail about some signature looks and what color schemes best define Fisherman Core. But I was a little surprised to see that Fisherman Core also extends to nail artwork. And granted, as someone who fishes not as often as I'd like to this year, I've been very busy, but someone who actively fishes when she has time. And I've been fishing since I was 8 years old, and more seriously since I was 12. I'm now in my close to mid-30s, in my mid-30s now. I've been fishing for most of my life. I can't tell you for the life of me how sophisticated nail art, which is beautiful. I think the fish patterns, they look a lot like plastic baits that you see a lot of fishermen use, and lures. Very creative. I don't think I would want to be fishing with very sophisticated luxury nail art like that, because knowing myself, my nails are prone to breaking. And I don't want to have any distractions or impediments to fishing, especially if you're handling live bait. Or even if you're not handling live bait, I just think there are too many factors that could chip the nail art. But if you're not fishing and you want to wear it, by all means, I'm not instructing you to not get Fisherman Core nails or not. But if you take a look at the pictures, you'll see that, yes, a lot of women do paint their nails. We paint our nails when we go fishing or do outdoor activities. Fine and dandy, but I think the acrylic artistic nails that you'll see that kind of epitomize Fisherman Core, those are really hard to fish with and hunt with, if we're being honest. Like, to have a lot, like anything too long could be interference when handling a gun, dealing with fishing equipment, and the like. So you want to be practical, but you might see a lady angler wear this when she's not fishing or in a more professional setting, and that's totally fine. But to mix the two, it's a little challenging to do that. What are some of the hallmark signature looks and aspects of Fisherman Core with respect to apparel? I've talked a little bit about the nails. I will link to the show notes what an example of that looks like. But let's talk about the aesthetics and the look and the color schemes that are definitive of this very hot fashion trend that borrows and draws inspiration from those of us who like to fish. Elle Decor magazine, which I think is an offshoot of Elle magazine. Fisherman Core is poised to be everywhere this summer, and we're fully on board. The tagline is "Step aside cottagecore. The nautical nostalgia revival is making waves in the design world." I like the puns. I'll give them credit for that. We're falling for this look, hook, line, and sinker. Fisherman Core. First, it gained headway in the fashion world, where sartorial icons like Gwyneth Paltrow and Katie Holmes were brandishing slouchy button-downs, bucket hats, and striped everything. Then the Pinterest Predicts 2025 trend report found that on their platform, the term fisherman sandals rose in searches by 30% year over year, and sardine tattoo spiked by 80%. Quote, in 2025, Gen Z and Gen X will, quote, embrace a laid-back maritime attitude and bring c'est la vie take to everything, the report predicted. The trend quickly crept into the design world, launching nostalgic nautical decor into online omnipresence. Homes everywhere are seeing a delightfully offbeat influx of fish-themed decor items, from sardine wallpaper to rainbow trout wall art. If you're even somewhat interested in embracing Fisherman Core in your home, below we've mapped out what this coastal trend involves and how to incorporate it into your space with class. It's a fashion and lifestyle aesthetic that draws inspiration from the rugged charm of coastal life and traditional maritime workwear, translating it into spaces that feel both grounded and serene. Fisherman Core interiors feel timeless and tactile, offering a quiet kind of luxury rooted in resilience and connection to nature. Think weathered wood, raw linen, sturdy canvas, and nautical accents that nod to a life spent by the sea. The palette leans on foggy blues, driftwood grays, seafoam greens, and sun-bleached neutrals, evoking the elements, salts, air, stormy skies, and worn docks. It's a style that values craftsmanship and simplicity, favor utilitarian pieces with soul, vintage finds, and textiles that tell a story. Interiors that lean into this look are replete with hardy yet warm objects like distressed oak furnishings, wrought iron fixtures, and knit throws. The key to nailing this look lies in steering away from kitschy-looking themed decor. Stay away from hanging fish welcome signs and tin quote signs. Instead, look for maritime relics such as industrial-style sconce, retro fishing art prints, and old boat paintings that create a bespoke atmosphere that feels authentic to the seafaring lifestyle. If you've created a space that harbors the comfort and functionality of an old fishing cottage, you've succeeded. I love how punny this is. This is actually great. I'm not against this trend. I just think it's so fascinating that our lifestyle, a lot of the lifestyle that we embrace as fishermen, whether it's people who do it recreationally or commercially, is now starting to be embraced by the wider public. Fisherman Core is more than just an aesthetic. It's a lifestyle grounded in simplicity, resilience, and a deep reverence for nature. It embraces slow living and the beauty of the everyday, favoring quality over excess and utility over trends. Whether reflected in the clothes we wear or the spaces we inhabit, it speaks to a desire to disconnect from the noise and reconnect with the rhythms of the natural world. Early mornings, salty air, hands-on work, and quiet moments of solitude. It's about embracing the imperfect and the weathered, finding comfort in authenticity, and living with intention, much like coastal communities that inspired it. Again, I'm not knocking the Fisherman Core trend. I just think the nail artwork is not really practical for fishing. You can wear it outside of fishing and everyone can decide what's best for them. Like standard nail painting, totally fine. But if you're exposed to the elements very frequently, it's not, your manicure, pedicure is not going to last for a very long time. And if you have very elaborate nail artwork, hard to do. But I really actually like the overall Fisherman Core trend. I think in terms of apparel, housing, and whatnot, as someone who grew up in a coastal community in Southern California and who longs to be close to a coastal community, the beach is about 2 hours, 45 minutes away from me. I have to go across several state lines to the closest beach to me, which is in Delaware, instead of Virginia Beach, which is 4 hours from me. Funny enough. But I love the coastal lifestyle. I grew up with it in Southern California, and I see no offense to this trend overall. It's just really funny that the nail artwork is what sticks out about it. But if more people can embrace the fishing lifestyle, heck, get a pair of waders, buy waders, breathable fishing shirts, polarized sunglasses, and the like. You don't have to be super luxurious with Fisherman Core or Fisherwoman Core, but you can be an angler too. It's very easy. You don't have to spend gobbles of money to achieve this look. Just talk to us who've gone fishing, and you too can live out the Fisherman Core, Fisherwoman Core lifestyle as we do naturally. Fishing has always been really trendy. It's really hard to narrow down what style looks like because everyone has different preferences. Some people wear really fancy fishing apparel. Others, like us, will be very casual, but still invest in like breathable shirts and things to protect ourselves from too much sun exposure, have professional glasses, hats, what have you, but you don't have to splurge a lot of money to achieve some modicum of Fisherman Core. But if it leads to people wanting to live by the ocean, to go to coastal communities, or perhaps try their hand at fishing, crabbing, or some derivative like that, all power to them. But I think this is one of the more acceptable trends, and I like the aesthetic. If it can lead to more people discovering about conservation, Dingell-Johnson Amendment, all power to it. So I'm not knocking the trend. I'm just curious about it, and I think you will be too. If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.